I was talking about this on Monday as I had first broke out the news. Ultimate Warrior, we now know the cause of his death. He died of a heart attack. He died of heart disease. Age of 54. You know, a lot of stuff just kind of adds up now when you really think about it. When you see how he was looking at the Hall of Fame ceremony and then at WrestleMania, and then you go to the night after WrestleMania and how he was just barely able to shake the ropes like he used to. And you're kind of saying to yourself, man, 54 years old, what exactly is going on here? And see, you haven't really been watching WWE that long, but I remember when Vince McMahon was Ultimate Warrior's age, not that long ago. And McMahon, I mean, he was buffed as hell. He had the body of a 30-year-old. And the Warrior that we had saw over the weekend, when you compare him to how he looked in the WWE 2K14 commercial, he definitely looked smaller. He looked frail. But, you know, a lot of us were like, you know, whatever. We shook it off. But now all the dots, they connect. Even Bruno Sammartino was recently quoted saying, hey, I just saw this guy and you know what? It kind of made sense, because even he spoke about it. But so many people were under the impression, well, not so many people, but you had the news media. Let me really home in on that. It was the news media that heard about what had happened with the Ultimate Warrior, and they decided to just paint that whole, well, steroids had to been involved in his cause of death. And one of the main culprits was Nancy Grace, who last week had brought in Diamond Dallas Page on her show, Headline News with Nancy Grace, or correction, I believe it's called Nancy Grace. It's on the Headline News Network. I think it's a sister channel of what, CNN maybe, or something, or some crap like that.
I'm not
whoever
sure.
their affiliate is, whatever. But we see Nancy Grace, who I'm thinking, hey, she's got Diamond Dallas Page on. I'm thinking as soon as I see him, oh, they're probably going to talk about the man's life, his legacy, what was he like? And instead, Nancy Grace uses the opportunity to take a big fat shit on Ultimate Warrior and all the other wrestlers that have died. And we start seeing like this video montage of wrestlers that died of steroids, and inaccurately, a lot of the people that they were showing did not die of taking steroids or abusing their body with drugs. Point being, Owen Hart, and those of us longtime wrestling fans, we know that Owen Hart had died tragically by falling to his death at a pay-per-view, okay? And you're kind of like, and we're friends with Natty, WWE Diva Natty, Natalia, on Twitter. And I have the pleasure of chatting with her from time to time. She was definitely emotionally upset that Nancy Grace had said those things about her sibling. And you can just imagine how the wrestling community was. Now, Diamond Dallas Page, he recently was quoted in an interview that he had gave, I can't remember the name of the show, but here's what he had to say about Nancy Grace. Direct quote, I almost got up and walked away. But if I would have done that, how would that look for wrestling? I was like, Nancy, he hasn't wrestled in 18 years. What are you talking about? And, you know, I know you didn't see it, but they had highlights of this little small Asian guy on Nancy Grace. I mean, his head was like about the size of my fist. No bull. And he's like, oh, yes. And I'm not making fun of Asian people, Filipino people, but this is exactly how he talked. Oh, yes, when you take steroids for a long period of time, it does a number to your body. So, yes, I wouldn't be too surprised if he died of steroids. Well, dipshits, Ultimate Warrior died of heart disease. Now, some could make the argument, Tammy, that maybe in his younger years, whatever he was doing to his body, it could have caught up with him. We can make that argument because it's the same rule could be made for smoking. You could be smoking for 20 years and then all of a sudden you stop, and then 20 years later it's been since you last had a cigarette, but it could still come back to bite you in the ass because all of a sudden you have cancer. So you can only speculate, but the bottom line is the man died of natural causes, right? Folks are looking for Nancy Grace to issue an apology on the TV show via social media. After she did that interview, Thursday she was off. Friday she was off. She's probably back on tonight, but for those of you that might be a little offended that it looks as though she tucked her tail in between her legs and ran off, there used to be a period of time where I would watch Nancy Grace religiously, Monday through Friday for a couple of years. And one of the main things I noticed with her was once she had her twins, Tammy, it started becoming Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and typically she would either take Thursday and or Friday off. So I just want to stress that to folks. But Tabby, I definitely want to get your take on that. Go ahead, jump in, and I'll share a little bit more news with regards to Nancy Grace.
Well, honestly, what really is the issue here is the fact that she made it seem that it was about dying too young and putting a negative light onto the whole Ultimate Warrior's death. And saying, oh, well, it had to be steroids, or at least hinting to that. Just like in the interview that I heard with DDP when he was on Nancy Grace, he said everybody did steroids back then. And it's not, first of all, this is not how she should have done this interview. I mean, grant you, yeah, she could have talked about, hey, what was going on with him the last couple of days. But instead, she really said, okay, so here's this person, this person, this person, this person, who sort of maybe possibly could have had a shorter lifespan because they were doing steroids. And unfortunately, in those people, you had somebody who had heart disease. You had somebody who had an accident and fell to his death. You have so many other things. It has nothing to, well, it doesn't have, not let's say it has nothing to do with it, but it shouldn't have been put that way. And unfortunately, do I think you're going to get an apology? No. Because everything when it comes to wrestling, unfortunately, and at least that's the way I've seemed to see it portrayed, it's always in a negative light. There's never any positive spin on it. When we report it, it has to be something negative. Instead of, okay, let's get to the facts. Let's really set the record straight. Unfortunately, it is what it is. And grant you, do I think she should issue an apology? Yeah, I do. But I don't think that will be coming. And I felt bad for DDP to have to sit through that. And I certainly agree with his comment saying, you know what? I want them to hear the whole story. So let me not get up in respect to Ultimate Warrior.
Right. And we've had DDP on our show before, and we should tell you guys, he's one of the nicest people that you'll ever come across. We had a blast talking with him. And I can only imagine how uncomfortable he was. I mean, I could just look at his face and tell he was a little bit irritated on what was going on, But guys, I know that there are some of you all that are trying to sign these petitions. There's one petition going on right now where last I checked, there was like over 20,000 signatures. And basically, they're trying to get Nancy Grace taken off the air. Let me tell you something. I love the fact you guys are trying to come all together and you're trying to get these signatures in mind and you're trying to do what you can to get Nancy taken off the air. But let me tell you something. It's not going to happen. Nancy Grace has been doing what she's been doing now for many years. Her relationship, her show that's been on headline news, as of next year, she would have racked up 15 years. And this is not the first. It's not going to be the last as far as controversies go. This girl has been surrounded in controversies for a long period of time. Go as far back to what had went down with the Kaylee Anthony case. Grace had made the comments such as fat, lazy, and that anyone who disagreed with her was lethargic, sitting on the sofa eating chips. All right. She had some controversial things to say about the Elizabeth Smart kidnapping. She had controversial things to say about the Daniel Van Dam case, the Duke lacrosse allegations, the suicide of interviewee Melinda Duckett, Kaylee Anthony, Whitney Houston. I mean, she's got a long track record of creating controversy, and some of you may be like, well, then why is she still on the air? It's because she's able to get a rise out of folks. She's like Howard Stern. That's basically the way I can really put it out there. She's like Howard Stern, but back when he was actually worth checking out, because the Howard Stern that we have nowadays, it's not the same Howard Stern. This Howard Stern is now concerned about being one of the judges on America's Got Talent, and he's dipping his fingers into all this other stuff. He's not the Howard Stern of the 90s that was like, oh my God, this guy's on FM. Oh, it's so bad, but it's so good. You know, Nancy Grace is kind of like that. And if you want to really get at her, I think you should try to attack her by going to her sponsors, because if you're able to get a hold of her sponsors, and the sponsors are like, okay, you know what, maybe we should kind of reevaluate our relationship with Nancy here, being affiliated with this show, and enough pull out, then it would definitely have to change the way that that show is structured. Another thing that I want to suggest to you guys, go after the producers of Nancy Grace. I mean, just stop and use common sense for a minute here. Do you honestly think that Nancy Grace kicks back and watches 4 weeks of wrestling? I highly doubt it. Does she watch 3 weeks of wrestling? I highly doubt it. How about 2 weeks of wrestling? I doubt it. How about even one? I doubt it. Does she even watch at least one wrestling show once a week? I highly doubt it. So all of you all that are very upset with Nancy Grace because, oh, well, she said this, you know, a lot of it falls on the shoulders of her producers, because it's ultimately the producers who have their hand in prepping that TV show host for whatever they're going to be talking about on that episode.
Mm-hmm. And 9 times out of 10, she did maybe 20, 30 minutes of preparation for the show, not really knowing the product, not really knowing the people, and you come off with their vision, because it might have been something that the producers went ahead and said, okay, you know, this is the angle, this is what I think you should go with, so on and so forth. But honestly, and sort of what Lee had said, you know, where if you're really that upset and you're really that, you know, just mad about it, honestly, the way that you show your support for her to be off the air is honestly to not watch. Because as soon as her ratings start going down and down and down and down and down, honestly, at that point, they're going to say, oh, well, wait a minute. What's going on? You know, she's hurting in the ratings, you know, and then thus the sponsors and so on and so forth. It's kind of like a domino effect. But basically, just turn it off.
One other thing, and I definitely want to say this before we move on, wrestlers out there, and Diamond Dallas Page, I love you, man. Your agents, your PR people, they are awesome. But if I could give one piece of advice to your people and to wrestlers everywhere, I would say dodge Nancy Grace. Because as far as Nancy Grace, because I like that look that you just made, but I'm serious. Look, dodge Nancy Grace, because Nancy Grace does not have anything good to say about the wrestling industry. And it's to follow up on what I had said earlier, Tammy, this week. How come when John Cena is able to grant 400 wishes while being part of the Make-A-Wish Foundation, that doesn't receive any type of press in the news media outlets? When the WWE is going all across the country and they're trying to encourage young kids to stay in school, learn how to read and write, because our country has fallen behind in mathematics, reading, and comprehension. We're losing out to other freaking countries, and as a result of that, all the good jobs is going to the foreigners and everything. And WWE, they're doing their part in trying to encourage that. They got their Don't Be a Bully, Be a Star campaign. They have probably one of the best programs that's out there as far as their wellness health policy. That's why they were able to get Bruno Sammartino back into the fold, because he liked what they were doing with the company. That's why they were able to get, largely in part, Ultimate Warrior back, because Warrior had liked what was going on with how it was. Because compared to when they had wrestled, it was a completely different beast. You had to rely on drugs back in the days when it was still a little bit naive. They didn't know back then in the 70s and 80s that, steroids is going to have this side effect, and, it's really bad from this standpoint. But we know so much now, and great wrestling companies like WWE is trying to make sure that everything is on the
up and out level.
Right. And it's clean and it's safe for everybody. Stay away from shows like Nancy Grace, because the only thing they know how to do is belittle wrestling. Their nose is up high in the air. They spit on wrestling. They can't comprehend it. They think it's silly. Look at how Nancy addressed Diamond Dallas Page when he was on there. I didn't recognize you without your clothes on. And it's kind of like...
Well, that was a knock.
Right, so...
But, in sort of what Lee had said, they do all these good things. But unless you're watching WWE, you don't hear about them on mainstream media. Mm-mm. You just don't. Mm-mm. The only time you hear anything about wrestling is when something bad has happened. Mm-hmm. And that's it. Mm-hmm. The last time something major came across the news headlines is on the unfortunate timely passing of Chris Benoit.
Mm-hmm. Well, that damn sure wasn't good, because
no, of course
that damn
not.
Sure wasn't good. Yeah,
I mean,
they had a field day when they found out.
They had a field day.
Oh, they had a field day with that.
Yeah,
they grilled the hell. I still remember when they grilled the hell out of Vince McMahon. Do you think it was right for you to air a 2-hour tribute in honor of Chris Benoit, knowing that he killed his family and he took his own life? And Vince McMahon was like, we didn't know at the time. We were just running off of pure emotion. Mm-hmm. We were just trying to do what we could to mourn the loss of one of our colleagues, one of our friends. Mm-hmm. We never thought in our wildest dreams that he killed himself and his family.
Exactly.
And I'm sure that it's something that Vince McMahon probably regrets to this very day. And if he could go back,
he would change it.
You know what I'm saying? Exactly. Mm-hmm. But, stay away from Nancy Grace. I just can't stress it enough. Don't have anything to do with her. I miss George Michael. George Michael was a sports anchor, legendary sports anchor over here that handled WRC TV 4 and NBC 4.
And the Sports Machine.
And he handled the Sports Machine. And you know what? George Michael was probably the only guy that I could think of that would talk about wrestling at least once a week. And he started doing it like about maybe 3 years before he passed away. He started weekly. He would start talking about what was going on in wrestling. And usually he would talk about WWE. And I always thought it was awesome that he highlighted it. And it was actually something that Dan Hellie had did for just a little bit. He tried to keep the tradition going, but then he switched it up. But I remember George Michael, we're talking about people that, hey, is there anybody that would at least cover the positives? And George Michael was actually one of those people.
Yeah, you're right. I do remember in the Washington D.C. area, I do remember certain times that he would cover that. But on the majority and mainstream, main scale, you don't hear about wrestling unless something bad and major happens. Mm-hmm. And usually it's more of the negative part. The only time you have positive is if you're watching a wrestling promotion and they're promoting it themselves. And that's about it.